6 days on a broken leg, 5 without a fire. The man dragging his ruined leg across the Edwards Plateau was a Texas Ranger. There was little left of him to prove it. His horse was dead. His company was scattered. The pistol at his hip carried 2 rounds. He was 23 years old. Somewhere behind him, in a canyon he could no longer name, 15 Rangers had ridden into a Penateka Comanche war party of 75. Not all of them rode out. The things that would keep him alive over the next 4 days were not the ones on the recruiting posters. Not the Colt Paterson, not the Bowie knife, older things. Quieter things, a splinter of mirror in a possible's bag. A pinch of willow bark, a coil of braided horsehair. Things his grandfather might have known. Things a Lipan Apache had shown a Tejano scout, who had shown a boy from Tennessee who was now bleeding into his own moccasin beside a shallow creek in the summer of 1844. 25 tools rode in a ranger's kit that year. Most of them survive in no modern survival manual. Why did we forget them? And of those 25, which one, in the end, brought this man home? If any of them did at all, San Antonio de Béxar sat on the edge of the known world. 800 souls, a crumbling old mission the Anglos already called the Alamo. Adobe walls the color of dried blood, a river that ran clear in spring and green with algae by August. Tejano women pounding corn on stone metates in doorways. German settlers, freshly off the boat at Indianola, arguing in a language nobody else spoke. A few ranger horses tied to a hitching rail outside a cantina, their flanks crusted with white salt from 100 miles of hard riding. And beyond the last house, nothing. Nothing but the Balcones escarpment, that long limestone ridge running north and west, the geologic seam where the coastal plain buckled up into the hill country. It was more than a line on a map, it was the border. On this side, a fragile republic. On the far side, Comancheria, the largest indigenous empire on the continent, ruled by the Penateka, the Noconi, the Quahati, and their allies, who had turned back the Spanish, humbled the Mexicans, and had every intention of turning back the Texans too. The wind that came off that escarpment in March smelled of cedar and cold stone. It was the wind Wiley Harmon rode into on the 14th of the month. He was 23 years old, born in a hollow outside Nashville, Tennessee, in the fall of 1821. Second of 7 children. His father broke horses for a living and drank whatever was left over. Wiley had shoveled stalls at a Nashville livery from the age of 10. He knew the smell of a foundered hoof. He knew the sound a horse made in the last hour of its life. He did not know much else. His older brother had died at San Jacinto in '36. His mother had died of consumption the winter after. There was nothing holding him in Tennessee, and a handbill nailed to a post office wall said the Republic of Texas paying $30 a month to any man with his own horse and his own gun who could ride and shoot and not lose his nerve. Wiley had ridden out that same week. By the time he reached San Antonio, the horse under him had lost 40 pounds, and his own coat had a hole in the elbow that no needle was ever going to close. The captain's name was John Coffee Hayes. He was 27. Small-framed, dark-eyed, quiet in a way that made grown men uneasy. He had come out of Tennessee, too, a nephew of Andrew Jackson by marriage. And he had spent his teenage years surveying land through country where the surveying party was as likely to be killed as paid. He had been running rangers out of Béxar since 1840. His men would follow him into a canyon a Comanche war chief would not enter. He signed Wiley's papers without looking up. 6 months. $30 a month, paid in Republic of Texas paper that everyone knew was worth about 40 cents on the dollar. Provide your own horse, provide your own weapons. Provide your own bedroll, your own coffee, and your own funeral, if it came to that. Hayes did look up at the end. He said one thing. "Boy, where are you from, Tennessee, sir?" Hayes nodded, as if that settled some private question, and slid the papers across. "Ride with Gillespie tomorrow. Learn the country before you learn anything else." That night, in the barracks, a converted horse stable behind the old Presidio, a ranger named Jakob Weiss showed Wiley how to lay out a possible's bag. Weiss was German, 24, with pale hair going early to gray at the temples. He had come over from Hesse Castle in the 39 6 words of English to his name. 4 years on the frontier had given him the rest. He spoke slowly and he spoke true. He tipped his own bag onto the blanket between them and named each item as it came out. A rifle, Kentucky pattern, .40 caliber, iron-mounted, the maple stock darkened by years of handling. A percussion Bowie knife with a 9-inch blade and a brass guard, the maker's mark scratched over so no one could steal the pride of it. Tin of caps, a powder horn scraped so thin you could hold it to a candle and see the black powder line inside. A leather sack of round lead balls, a small iron bullet mold hinged like a clamshell. A folded square of red cotton bandana, a pouch of jerked beef pounded with tallow and mesquite bean flour. A tin cup blackened, a folding pocket knife, a whetstone the size of a domino wrapped in oiled rawhide. An awl of deer bone, a hank of sinew, a tin of char cloth beside a flint and steel, pinch of salt in a corked vial, a stub of beeswax, and buried at the bottom a small oval mirror the size of a silver dollar. Ice set the mirror last, for fire, he said, for shaving. For signaling if the country breaks you. Wiley picked it up. It caught the lantern flame and threw it, small and cold, against the far wall. "Has the country broke you yet?" Weiss smiled without any humor in it. "Not all the way." 3 days later, a rider came in from a rancho outside Castroville with blood on his shirt cuff. Tejano family named Villarreal had been raided in the night. 2 horses stolen, a dog killed, a grain shed burned. The rider, a boy of maybe 15, said the raiders had come on unshod ponies and left tracks running west. The sergeant on duty, a man named Robert Addison Gillespie Scots-Irish, out of Tennessee, 30 years old, red-bearded, missing the top joint of his left index finger, read the boy's face for a long minute and then spat into the dirt. "Comanche," he said. Weiss, standing beside him, said nothing. Wiley learned that day that on the Texas frontier, the word Comanche was not always a fact. Sometimes it was a decision. They rode out 15 strong. Gillespie at the head. Hayes back in Béxar on business with the Republic quartermaster. A Tejano scout named Antonio Pérez, riding a lean Grula mare at the sergeant's left shoulder. Antonio was 42, born in Béxar in the spring of 1802, when the town still belonged to Spain. His father had been a cart driver. His Hummer had died of smallpox in the epidemic of 1816. He wore a straw hat and a wool serape from Saltillo, and he carried a flintlock escopeta so old the lock plate had been rebrazed twice. He rode the way a man rides when the country is his own body, no wasted motion, no display. He had a sister once, Elena. She had been 14 years old on the 6th of August, 1840, when Buffalo Hump led 400 Penateka Comanche and their allies down through Victoria and burned the port at Linville to the ground. Elena had been visiting an aunt in Victoria that week. She had never come home. Antonio did not talk about her. But Wiley noticed that when the sergeant said the word Comanche, Antonio's jaw did something small and private that no one else in the patrol seemed to see. They followed the tracks west. The country between Béxar and the Medina River in March was mesquite and prickly pear and short grass just beginning to green up after the winter rains. Tracks were 4 unshod horses moving at a fast walk. Antonio dismounted twice to read the ground. The second time he stood up slowly and looked at Gillespie across the horse's shoulder. "Sergeant," he said. His English was clean and lightly accented. "These are not Comanche horses." Gillespie squinted down at him. "Explain that." "The hoof is worn on the outside edge. A Comanche pony runs on the inside. They ride at the gallop, they cut sharp. These horses walked in from the south, slow, with weight on the back. And Comanche do not raid a rancho of 2 horses. They raid a rancho of 200. This is bandidos. Or hungry men." Gillespie let a long breath out through his nose. "Ride on." They found the camp at dusk on the second day. It was tucked into a limestone wash below a bluff, and there was no fire, and the 4 horses were tied close, and there were 7 human figures huddled under a single canvas that had once been part of a freight wagon's tarpaulin. Not 4 bandits, an old man, 2 women, 4 children. All of them thin, all of them silent Lipan Apache. Day, what was left of a band that had once ranged from the Nueces to the Pecos and now had almost nowhere to be. Pushed by Comanche pressure from the north, by Mexican dragoons from the south, by Texas settlement from the east. The old man's face was cut deep with lines that had nothing to do with age. Gillespie sat his horse and looked down at them for a long time. Then he said, "String up the old one. The others can walk back to Béxar for the court." 2 rangers dismounted and unshipped a rope. Antonio moved his horse a step forward. "Sergeant, they took nothing but bread. Look at the shed. The tracks show they cut open the meal sack and ate on the ground. They stole no horses. Those 4 horses are their own. They are starving. They burned a granary. The granary caught from their cook fire. It was an accident. You know that for a fact." "I know," Antonio said quietly, "that you cannot hang a man before you have asked him a question." So Gillespie looked down at the Tejano scout with something ugly building behind his eyes. And in that half-second, with the rope already uncoiling, and Wiley Harmon, 3 days a ranger, sitting his horse in the back of the line, feeling his throat close up a rider came in fast from the south. It was Hayes. He must have ridden hard from Béxar. His horse was blowing foam. He took in the scene in one glance, the old Lipan. The rope. Antonio at Gillespie's stirrup. He said one word. "Down." The ranger with the rope hesitated. "Down," I said. "Coil that rope and put it back on your saddle. Sergeant Gillespie, dismount. You and I will speak." They walked 40 paces out into the mesquite. Nobody could hear what was said. When they came back, Gillespie's face was closed like a fist, and Hayes gave the order to break camp and ride back to Béxar at first light. The Lipita family was given a sack of cornmeal, 3 pounds of jerked beef, and left where they stood. The old man watched the rangers ride away without moving. When Antonio Pérez turned in the saddle to look back, the old man raised one hand, not in thanks, just in acknowledgement that he had seen them, that they had seen him, that both parties understood exactly what had almost happened and what still might on some other night with some other sergeant and some other rope. 3 nights later, in the barracks, a ranger named Chivers reached into Antonio Pérez's saddlebag looking for tobacco. What he pulled out was a strand of blue trade beads. Comanche beads, the kind traded up from the Comancheros who ran goods between Santa Fe and the Llano Estacado. Kind no Tejano scout riding for the Texas Rangers had any legitimate reason to possess. Chivers held them up in the lantern light. "Well now," he said. The room got very quiet. Antonio was cleaning his escopeta on the far bench. He did not look up right away. When he did, his face was very still. "Those are mine," he said. "I know they're yours. That's the problem." Gillespie was in the doorway. He had come in without a sound. "Stand up." Antonio stood, explained the beads. Antonio Pérez looked at Sergeant Gillespie for a long moment. Then he looked past him, at the black square of the window. There, somewhere out beyond the last adobe wall, the wind was moving through the cedar on the escarpment, and somewhere past the escarpment, a woman who had once been his sister was sleeping in a hide lodge on the headwaters of the Colorado of Texas with a Comanche husband beside her and a child at her breast, and had not been called Elena Pérez for 4 years. He said, "I trade with the Comanchero out of Béxar twice a year. He carries word for me." "Word of what?" "Of my sister." The room stayed quiet. "She was taken at Victoria," Antonio said. "In the August raid 4 years past. She was 14. I have been trying to find her." This, he nodded at the beads in Cheevers's hand, was payment. "For a name, for a band, for a place I might ride to." Gillespie said, "You've been running information to the Comanche." "No, you've been running information from them. Same thing to a man who don't care to see the difference." Hayes stepped into the room. He looked at the beads. He looked at Antonio. He looked for a longer moment at Sergeant Gillespie. Then he said, "Pérez rides with me tomorrow, north, up the Pedernales and past it into the Llano country. We are going to be gone 8 weeks. Any man in this room who cannot ride beside him without watching his back had best turn in his papers tonight." Nobody turned in his papers. But that night, lying on his blanket in the dark, Wiley Harmon listened to Jacob Weiss breathing on one side of him and Antonio Pérez breathing on the other. And he understood for the first time that the frontier he had ridden all the way from Tennessee to find was not a line between civilization and savagery. It was a country full of people trying to survive each other. And in the morning, they were going to ride into the deepest part of it. They rode out of Béxar on the morning of the 2nd of May. 16 men, 15 rangers, and 1 Tejano scout. Each ranger with 2 Colt No. 5 Paterson revolvers on his belt, 5 chambers apiece, 36 caliber, loaded with round ball, over 20 grains of black powder. Rifles across the pommel, Bowie knives at the small of the back. Bedrolls of saltillo wool lashed behind the cantle. 2 spare horses on lead lines. Enough hardtack, pemmican, coffee, and lead to last a company of that size about 4 weeks in country where nothing could be bought and nothing could be borrowed. The plan was 3 weeks up the Pedernales into the headwaters of the Llano and back. They were gone almost 6. The first 10 days were easy country. They followed the old Pinta Trail north out of Béxar, a track worn by centuries of feet before any Anglo had walked it. Comanche feet, Lipan feet, Spanish sandal, Mexican boot. Trail crossed the Guadalupe River at a shallow limestone ford. And beyond the ford, the cedar thickened, and the country began to rise into the hill country proper. At night they camped in draws below the ridge line where the fires would not show. They made coffee in a battered tin pot, boiled hard with a pinch of salt and a pinch of ground eggshell to settle the grounds. Arbuckles had not yet come to Texas in 1844, that would be 20 years off. So the beans were green Guatemalan, roasted in the same iron skillet they used for the morning bacon, then pounded in a scrap of canvas with a rifle butt. It tasted like scorched dirt. Every ranger drank 2 cups a night regardless. Wiley Harmon learned the Sotol drill from Antonio Pérez on the 4th night. Antonio cut a section of last year's dead flower stalk, dry and light as balsa. He split a second piece flat for a fireboard, notched it, and spun the drill between his palms, with a rhythm that came out of some deep place, palm to palm, faster, the shoulders locked, the elbows not moving until a curl of black dust smoked out of the notch and dropped onto a pinch of cottonwood down. Antonio bent close and blew, once, twice, 3 long, slow breaths. Fire. Under 3 minutes from 2 dead sticks. Match will fail, Antonio said, sitting back on his heels. Steel will fail. Powder will get wet. This he tapped the Sotol stalk against his knee. This grows out of the ground. Every mile from here to the Rio Bravo. It will not fail you unless you fail to know it. Old Wiley practiced every night for a week before he could raise smoke. On the 8th night he raised an ember. Antonio nodded once and said nothing, and that nod was the first thing on the frontier Wiley Harmon had felt proud of. They saw the first sign of Comanche on the 12th day. A single moccasin print in the dried mud of a buffalo wallow. Then, half a mile on, the ashes of a small fire, still faintly warm at the center when Antonio pushed his hand into them. Then, a mile past that, the picked clean skeleton of a mule deer with the leg bones cracked for marrow. A hunting party, small 4 men, maybe 5, moving northwest, keeping to the low ground. Not looking for a fight. Hayes adjusted the column's course 2 points east to give them room, and they rode on. On the 15th day, on the north bank of the Pedernales River, the sky did the thing that hill country skies do in late spring, and every ranger in the column who had been through a Texas May felt his gut go tight. It had been a hot afternoon, 95 degrees, cicadas screaming in the live oaks. The horses lathered. Then, out over the balconies to the west, a wall of cloud came up the color of a fresh bruise, blue-black at the bottom, boiling green at the top. The wind died flat. A cottonwood leaf turned belly up on its stem. Temperature dropped 10 degrees in 10 minutes. Hayes looked at the sky. He looked at the river running low and clear over a bed of pale limestone. He said one word, high ground. They moved fast. 2 of the pack horses were still being watered at the bank when the first raindrops hit cold as well water, the size of a ranger's thumbnail. 10 seconds later, it was solid rain, beats of it, coming sideways. They got 12 of the horses up onto the bench above the river. They did not get the pack horses. The Pedernales came up 7 feet in 40 minutes. Colt Wiley Harmon would remember, until the day he died, the sound of it not a roar, not a thunder, but a low grinding, like a millstone the size of a mountain being dragged over gravel. Whole trees came down the river. A dead cow, legs stiff, rolled past in the brown water. And in the middle of the flood, that one of the pack horses, still tethered by its lead line to a mesquite, that had already been torn out at the roots, the horse's eyes white, its head going under, coming up, going under, coming up one last time. And Jakob Weiss, the German, who had that horse's lead in his hand when the water first came, went in after it. Nobody ordered him to. Nobody stopped him. Weiss got a knife on the tether. The horse came free. The horse swam. Weiss did not. Current took him 300 yards downstream before it slammed him into a limestone bluff. 2 rangers rode along the top of the bluff and got a riata down to him. He was alive when they hauled him up, but the ribs on his left side had folded in like a stove in barrel, and there was blood on his lips that came from somewhere no man walks away from. They carried him to a dry ledge under an overhang and built a fire and made him as easy as they could. He lasted 3 days. On the 2nd day he asked Wiley for coffee, and Wiley made it strong and held the tin cup to his mouth. On the 3rd day he did not ask for anything. He looked at the roof of the overhang for a long time as if he was reading a language written up there. Then he closed his eyes. Then he stopped breathing. It was that small. They buried Jakob Weiss on a bench above the pedernales, under a cairn of river stones, with his rifle broken across the cairn the way the old Kentucky men had taught them. Hayes read a passage out of a pocket Bible in a voice that did not carry 10 feet. Antonio Pérez, who was Catholic, crossed himself. Wiley Harmon, who did not know what he was, took off his hat and held it against his chest and did not know where to look. Ace's Possible's bag went into the company kit. His mirror, the small oval mirror, the size of a silver dollar, Hayes walked over and pressed into Wiley Harmon's palm. "He showed you," Hayes said. "You carry it." The ranger, who had been 3 weeks a ranger, closed his fingers around the mirror and could not speak. They lost 2 horses in the flood and 4 days on Weiss's dying. Though by the time they moved north again, the country had begun to change. The cedar thinned, the live oaks gave way to post oak and blackjack. Pedernales narrowed into 100 small creeks. They were past the balconies now, past the line. Deep in country where no Anglo settlement existed and no Anglo law had any weight. They were in Comancheria. Antonio taught them the country as they rode. This plant, the cenizo, silvered its leaves before rain. This one, the lechiguilla, cut a horse's leg to the bone if you tried to walk through a stand of it. This one, the barrel cactus, could save a man's life if he knew where to drive an awl and how far. The nopal flat pads of prickly pear, if you burned the spines off in a fire and split the pad, you could press it against a wound and it would draw the poison out. The willow, growing along every creek, the inner bark, chewed or boiled, that would break a fever. None of these things came from a ranger manual. There was no ranger manual. There was only Antonio Pérez, 42 years old, born in Béxar the year Thomas Jefferson bought Louisiana, teaching a Tennessee boy how to stay alive in a country his own ancestors had known for 200 years. On the 23rd day, they came around a bend of a small tributary of the Llano and rode straight into a Penateka camp. Not a war party, a rancheria, 28 people. 6 lodges of tanned buffalo hide, a pony herd of maybe 40 animals grazing on the far slope. Women scraping a fresh hide staked out on the grass. Children playing a stick game in the dirt, an old man mending a bow. Both sides saw each other at the same instant. The Comanche men, there were 5 of them in camp, reached for weapons. The ranger column reached for pistols. In 2 more seconds, 33 people would have been in a fight nobody wanted. Hayes reined his horse in and slowly, deliberately, raised his empty right hand, palm out the sign, "Talk for hold." Then he made another sign, then another, slow, careful. The way a man speaks when the wrong word will kill him. "We are passing through. We do not want your horses. We do not want your women. We do not want a fight." Oldest, Penateka man in the camp, gray in his braids, a puckered scar running from his cheekbone down under his jaw, set his war club down on the ground where everyone could see it. He signed back, then passed through. For 20 minutes, nobody moved a hand toward a weapon. The rangers walked their horses at a slow, deliberate pace across the near edge of the camp. Nobody spoke. A Comanche woman at the hide scraping did not lift her head. A child of maybe 4 came out from behind a lodge and stared at Wiley Harmon with the enormous, unafraid eyes of a small thing that has not yet been taught what to fear. And then Wiley would think about this for the rest of his life. A young ranger named Cheevers, the same Cheevers who had found the beads in Antonio's saddlebag, let his horse drift a step out of column. As he passed the fire circle, he leaned down out of the saddle and reached, casually, playfully, the way a man on a Tennessee street might tease a farm girl at a market stall, and put his fingers on the wrist of a Penateka woman standing there. She did not scream. She did not need to. The scarred old man had a knife in his hand before Cheevers had straightened in the saddle. One of the younger Penateka men had a bow drawn. On the ridge above the camp, Wiley saw it only later 2 more men had risen up out of the grass with rifles. Hayes did not shout. Hayes never shouted, he said. Cheevers. Come to the front of the column now. Cheevers came. Hayes walked his horse 3 paces toward the scarred old man, hands open, and made one long, slow sign. The young one is a fool. The young one will be dealt with. We are riding out now. The old man held the knife for another long second. Then he lowered it, not because he forgave, because he chose, for reasons of his own, that this was not the day. The Rangers rode out of that camp at a walk that felt like a mile a minute. 2 miles down the creek, Hayes dismounted, walked back to Cheevers, and without a word, broke his nose with the butt of a Paterson. Then he mounted and rode on. Nobody said anything for the rest of the day. That night, Antonio Pérez sat by the fire and stared into it for a long time before he spoke. The Penateka were 4,000 people 12 years ago, he said. In the winter of 40 and 41, the smallpox came up out of Mexico. Killed 1 in every 2. That old man tonight, the one with the scar, he buried his wife and 3 of his children in 1 week. He is not merciful. He is only tired. He put another stick on the fire. They are not what they were, and we are not what they think we are. And nobody in this country knows the truth about anybody anymore. On the 28th day, on a nameless creek, somewhere north of the Llano, Antonio Pérez's mare was bitten by a diamondback rattlesnake in the dark before dawn. The horse was dead within the hour. Antonio dressed the mare's saddle and bridle onto a spare, and by first light he was already saddled and moving north, alone, at a hard trot. He was gone 3 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Rangers were preparing to break camp and ride after him when he rode back in. His new horse was blown. His face was gray under the dust. Carried nothing in his hands. But Wiley Harmon, watching him swing down from the saddle, understood at once that Antonio Pérez had ridden to the far edge of some private country and come back a different man. He would not tell them, at first, where he had gone. Later that night, Hayes sat down beside him at the fire and did not speak. After a long while, Antonio said, I rode north, 2 nights. I found a rancheria of the Noconi band, 15 lodges on a fork of the Colorado of Texas. My Comanchero had given me the location. Hayes waited. He was there, Antonio said. The fire popped once. She is 18 years old now. She has a husband. She has a boy of maybe 2 years and a girl at the breast. She did not know me at first. Then she knew me and did not want to know me. She would not come out of the lodge. Her husband, a young man, a warrior of some standing, he told me, through hand talk, that she was his wife and the mother of his children, and that if I tried to take her, he would kill me, and that if I did not try to take her, he would give me a horse and a night's food and let me ride out in peace. He was quiet for a long moment. I took the horse, he said. Took the food. I rode out in peace. Because she looked at me through the lodge door once when she thought I could not see, and I understood. He stopped. Hayes said quietly, understood what? Edwards Pérez, 42 years old, said that she has been more Penateka these last 4 years than she was ever Tejano in the first 14. The girl I have been riding across Texas to find is dead, and that the woman living in her body would rather stay dead to me than have to choose. Hayes put a hand on Antonio's shoulder. He did not say anything else. Antonio Pérez did not speak again for 6 days. On the 7th of June, they turned south for home. They were tired. Half the horses were footsore. Their coffee was gone. Their pemmican was down to 2 days. They had been in the saddle 36 days and buried 1 man and nearly buried 2 more, and there was not a ranger in the column who was not counting the miles back to Béxar in his sleep. They camped that night on a small tributary of the Guadalupe River in what is now Kendall County, Texas. Tree-lined draw, good grass, a clear spring at the head of the creek. Hayes posted 2 pickets and let the men sleep for the first time in a week without a rotation. They named the place in the morning for the little creek that ran past their camp. Walker's Creek. At first light on the 8th of June, 1844, a ranger picket named Noah Cherry came skidding down the draw on foot, breathing hard, and called out to Sergeant Gillespie. Comanche, ridge to the north, a lot of them. Gillespie went up the draw at a run. He came back down at a walk. His face was set in the way a man's face sets when he is finished. In the space of 30 seconds, Ace all calculating he is ever going to do about the rest of his day. 70, he said. Maybe 75. Full paint. Yellow Wolf's band, if I've read the shields right. Ace nodded once. Saddle up. All revolvers loaded and capped. All rifles in hand. We ride to them. Wiley Harmon, 3 months a ranger, tightened the girth on his horse with fingers he could not entirely feel. He touched Jakob Weiss's mirror in the possibles bag at his hip. Then he mounted and rode. The battle at Walker's Creek is remembered, in the histories written afterward, as the fight that changed the frontier. 15 Texas Rangers against 75 Penateka Comanche under a war chief the Anglos called Yellow Wolf. First battle in which a repeating handgun was used in open country against mounted warriors. The moment, as one Comanche survivor is said to have told a trader years later, when the white man had a shot for every finger on his hand. That is what the histories say. What the histories do not say is that in the middle of it, the Colt no. 5 Paterson, the pistol that had traveled from Samuel Colt's full and failing factory in New Jersey to the Texas Navy's armory in Galveston to the belts of 15 Rangers on a nameless creek in what would become Kendall County did not always work. Cushion caps split, cylinders bound. On the 3rd or 4th reload, in the heat and the dust and the confusion, more than one ranger felt his weapon lock up in his hand while a Penateka rider closed the distance at a full gallop with a 12-foot lance leveled. Robert Addison Gillespie took an arrow through the meat of his thigh in the first minute. Sam Walker took a lance through his lower body and would carry the scar to Mexico 3 years later. A ranger named Peter Four, a German, who had enlisted at San Antonio in the winter of '41, was shot through the head early in the fight and did not get up. And Wiley Harmon's horse, a bay gelding named Judge, that had carried him from Nashville to Béxar and from Béxar into Comancheria, took a rifle ball through the base of the neck as the Rangers broke to a tree grove on the far side of the creek. The horse went down at a full run. Wiley went with it. He came back to himself, he did not know how much later, lying on his side in the grass. The battle was still going on, but it was far away. He could hear the flat pop of the Patersons and the higher whistle of Comanche arrows going out of the timber over his head. He could hear a horse screaming somewhere down the creek. He could hear a ranger shouting an order in a voice that cracked. Could not hear any of it very well. There was a roaring in his ears. His right leg would not move. He looked down and understood in a slow way that his knee was on wrong. The joint had come apart when Judge went down. The lower leg was turned outward at an angle a leg is not meant to turn. And a Comanche arrow he had not felt. It had gone through the meat of his thigh, entered the front, exited the back, and was still in him, the iron head out one side and the fletching out the other. The arrow shaft had not hit the big vein. If it had, he would already be dead. He was going to have to break the shaft. He was going to have to push it through. He was going to have to do it now, before the shock wore off and the pain came in for real, because in about 4 minutes he was not going to be capable of doing anything at all. He broke the fletched end off first, cleanly with his hands. Then he took hold of the iron head where it protruded from the back of his thigh, and he pulled. He did not scream. He did not have the wind for it. He made a sound that was not quite a sound. The shaft came through with a soft, wet grinding that he would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. He wadded a piece of his shirt against the entry wound and another piece against the exit wound, and tied both with a strip of rawhide he cut from his hobble. Then he tried to stand up and could not. Then he tried to crawl and could. The Rangers did not know he was down. In the smoke and the dust, in the retreat to the tree grove and the second charge and the third, Sergeant Gillespie would count heads at the end of the fight and come up one short and assume, as any man in his place would have assumed, Wiley Harmon was somewhere in the grass with the Comanche knife in him and no need for a return trip. By the time he thought to look an hour after, the Penateka had broken off and ridden north. Wiley Harmon had crawled a quarter mile up the creek and into a limestone crevice under a bluff, where his body had gone into deep shock and had shut down all noise, all movement, all breath he could control. The Rangers looked. For half a day they looked. They did not find him. They rode south, carrying Peter For's body on a travois, and reported at Béxar 4 days later that Ranger Wiley Harmon of Tennessee had been killed at Walker's Creek and was presumed buried by the Comanche, and his name went into the company ledger with a small cross beside it. He was, at that moment, 40 miles from Béxar, still alive and very much alone. 6 days, that is how long it took him to walk out. Not walk, exactly. On the first day, when the shock let go and the pain came in, he could not have walked across the crevice he was lying in. He drank from the trickle at the bottom of it. He chewed a strip of jerked beef he had in his belt pouch until it was soft enough to swallow. Passed out for what he thought was an hour, and turned out to have been the rest of the day and most of the night. On the second day, he made a crutch. He cut a green mesquite fork with his bowie, wrapped the top with a strip cut from his coat, and taught himself, over about 4 hours, how to swing his ruined right leg forward without letting the knee take any weight at all. Every step was a lightning bolt of pain that traveled from the joint up through his hip and lodged behind his eyes. He could move about 10 paces before he had to sit down. He made 4 miles that day. He would not have believed before that a man could make 4 miles that way. He built no fire the first 2 nights. He was too close to the battleground and too uncertain about who else was moving in that country. He lay in a shallow scrape in the dirt under a cedar and shivered and did not sleep. On the 3rd day, the wound in his thigh began to smell. He knew the smell. Every ranger knew the smell. It was the smell that came before the red streaks came, and after the red streaks came, a man had maybe 2 days before the poison reached his heart. He remembered Antonio Pérez crouched by a fire 8 weeks before, holding up a strip of pale inner bark from a creek willow. This will break a fever. This will slow the poison. Chew it or boil it. It will not save you, but it will buy you time. Wiley Harmon crawled to the nearest creek and stripped willow bark until his fingers bled, and chewed it, and packed the pulp into the wound on both sides, and tied it in with another strip of his coat. As he also remembered the puffball mushrooms, Antonio had shown him the small round white ones that grew in cattle pastures back eaten out here on the edge of live oak groves. Break one open, and the brown spore dust inside stopped bleeding faster than anything a ranger surgeon carried in his kit. Wiley found 2 puffballs on the 4th morning and packed the spores into the exit wound. He built his first fire on the third night. He dug a pit 2 feet deep and set the fire down in the pit and covered the top with flat shale so no light showed above the ground. Antonio's trick. The smoke came out clean and low, and the heat rose straight up, and he cooked a small rabbit he had caught with a horsehair snare set across a run at dusk. He ate the rabbit slowly. He drank water from a gourd he had not lost in the fall. He was going to live at least one more day. On the 4th day, he found the other man. He had crossed a low ridge and come down into a dry draw looking for water. And there in the shade of an overhanging rock 30 feet from where Wiley was standing on his crutch was a Penateka Comanche warrior with a rifle ball through his lower belly. The man was maybe 28, stripped to a breech clout and moccasins. His face was painted for war in vermilion and black, but the paint had smeared and cracked, and half of it was gone. His war shield lay next to him, a bow, a quiver with 3 arrows still in it. He had a knife in his right hand. He looked up at Wiley Harmon and did not move. He had been hit at Walker's Creek. He had ridden until he could not ride. Then he had walked. Then he had crawled into this draw to die. It had taken him 6 days, too. He was in the last hours of it now. Wiley could see it in his face. The Comanche man could see it in his own body. There was no confusion between them about what was happening. Wiley Harmon had a Paterson at his belt with 2 rounds still in it. He had a Bowie knife. He was, by every definition, his sergeant would have recognized, standing over a dying enemy who had ridden out to kill him 6 days ago and would have finished the job with pleasure. He looked at the man for a long time. Then he laid his crutch down. He unslung his gourd canteen, limped the 30 feet across the draw, sat down in the dirt an arm's length from the Penateka warrior, and held the gourd out. The man looked at him. The man put down the knife. He drank, slowly, a little at a time. Wiley Harmon watched his throat move and thought about nothing at all. They did not have a language between them. Wiley knew perhaps 6 words of hand talk. Penateka man was too weak to sign in any case. They sat in the shade of the rock, an arm's length apart, and did not speak for perhaps 3 hours. Once the Penateka man reached up and touched, very lightly, the place on his own chest where a small pouch hung on a sinew cord. It was a medicine pouch. Oh, Wiley understood, without being told, that inside it was something the man's family had made for him, or a spirit had given him, or he had made for himself, and that it was, at this moment, the most important object in his world. Wiley reached into his own possibles bag and brought out the small oval mirror. Jacob Weiss's mirror. He held it out. The Penateka man took it in fingers that were already beginning to go cold. He looked at it. He turned it once. He caught the sun in it and threw a small circle of light against the rock face above their heads, and for a half a second something moved across his face that was almost a smile. Then he closed his hand around it. He died before sundown. Wiley Harmon covered him with stones. He did it slowly, 1 stone at a time, because he was crippled and half-starved, and he did not have any other pace. He put the medicine pouch under the man's folded hands. He left the mirror where the man had closed his eyes on it. He said no words over the cairn, because he did not know the man's name, and did not know the man's people's words for the dead, and did not think anything in his own language would fit. When it was done, he sat beside the cairn for a long time and looked at the sky. Then he took up his crutch and walked on. On the 6th day, near the middle of the afternoon, a boy of 16 named Tomas Ramirez was riding fence line along the north bank of the Medina River, 12 miles below the settlement of Bandera, when a flash of light came off the ridge above him. It was the wrong kind of light, not sun on limestone. Dots, not sun on water. A small, quick, deliberate flash, and then another, and then another. Wiley Harmon, lying on his side at the top of the ridge with the last of his strength, had cut a splinter of mica out of the rock face with the point of his Bowie knife and was using it as a mirror because he had given his mirror away. Tomas rode up the ridge at a hard trot. He found a man he did not know, half dead of infection and thirst and shock, holding a piece of stone up to the sun with a hand that could not stop shaking. Tomas Ramirez was Tejano. His father, Manuel, and his mother, Isabel, had a small jacal and a cornfield and a few cattle on a bend of the Medina. In the summer of 1842, 2 years earlier, a company of rangers, not Hayes's company, a different company, out of Gonzales, had come through looking for Mexican sympathizers on the eve of the Wool invasion and had dragged Manuel Ramirez out of his own doorway and beaten him with a rifle butt until his left ear no longer heard sound. Manuel Ramirez still could not hear on his left side. When Tomas brought Wiley Harmon down off to the ridge on the back of his pony, and Manuel Ramirez came out of the jacal and saw a ranger's coat and a ranger's Bowie knife and a ranger's Paterson pistol hanging from the belt of the ruined man draped across his son's saddle. Manuel did not send them away. Manuel did not turn his face. Manuel did what a man on that river had been raised to do, since before there was a Texas or a Mexico or a Spain. He said Bahalo, and he helped his son lift the stranger down. And he carried Wiley Harmon into his own house and laid him on his own bed and told Isabel to boil water in tearcloth. 3 weeks, Isabel Ramirez nursed him. She washed the wound in the thigh twice a day with water in which she had boiled the roots of the yerba mansa the old women along the river had used for 2 centuries. She fed him beans and corn tortillas and a broth made from a chicken that Manuel had been saving for the Feast of the Assumption. She said the rosary over him on the nights when his fever climbed. She spoke to him, Spanish, in a low, steady voice, of nothing in particular, the weather, the river, the price of corn, because she had learned, in a long life on that river, that a man in a fever needs to hear a human voice more than he needs to understand it. Wiley Harmon lived. The knee never came right. He would walk for the rest of his days with a cane and a limp. The scar in the thigh, face, front and back, would open sometimes in cold weather and weep a little clear fluid, and he would clean it with willow bark tea until he was an old man and there was no more willow near where he lived. When he was strong enough to sit up at the Ramirez table, on the 16th day, he tried to say something to Manuel Ramirez. Something about the ear, something about the Rangers in 42. Something about the rope another sergeant had almost put on an old Lipan man in March, and how his own sergeant had almost let it happen. Damon Ramirez, who did not hear on his left side, turned his good ear toward the Tennessee boy and listened with a face that gave nothing away. And when Wiley had finished stammering out whatever it was, he had tried to say, Manuel put one weathered hand on the boy's forearm and said, in careful English, "You are in my house. Eat your soup." That was the whole conversation. Wiley Harmon ate his soup. He rode back into Béxar on the 9th of October, 1844, on a mule Manuel Ramirez had given him and would not let him refuse. Company was gone. The Republic of Texas had run out of money to pay Rangers on the 23rd of September, and Hayes had disbanded the men and told them to be ready if he called them again. Antonio Pérez had gone home to his mother's house in Béxar and had not spoken publicly of his sister to anyone. Sergeant Gillespie was recovering from the arrow through his thigh at a boarding house on Commerce Street. Sam Walker was still in Texas, healing from the lance wound he had taken at the creek, and would not ride east to meet the bankrupt inventor Samuel Colt for another 2 years. though he was already talking, to any ranger who would listen of every change the Paterson revolver needed if it was going to be a weapon a man could bet his life on. Wiley Harmon did not sign up for a second enlistment. He took what pay was owed him in Republic paper worth 40 cents on the dollar, and he rode east. And he did not stop until he was in Washington County, on the Brazos, where he took a job breaking horses for a farmer named Eldridge, and did not carry a pistol again for 11 years. He married a widow named Sarah Bowen in the spring of 1849. He raised 3 children. He buried one of them, a daughter of 4, in the cholera epidemic that came up the Brazos that summer. He drank a good deal for a period in the middle of his life, and then stopped drinking, and he never spoke to his wife or his sons of Walker's Creek, or of the man he had covered with stones in a drive draw, or of the mirror that Jakob Weiss had put into his hand in a Béxar barracks in the spring of 1844. He died in the fall of 1889, at the age of 68, of pneumonia, in a bed on his own farm, with his oldest son beside him. The son said later that in the last hour Wiley Harmon had spoken a few words that did not make sense, something about willow bark, and something about a Tejano woman boiling water, and something right at the end about a light on the top of a ridge. The son wrote it in the family Bible and let it stand. The Penateka Comanche in the years that followed were pressed and pressed and pressed. The smallpox that had killed half of them in 1840 came back. Cholera came in 1849 and killed most of what was left. Buffalo herds on which their whole way of living depended were shot out by hide hunters between 1872 and 1878. In the summer of 1875, the last free Penateka bands surrendered at Fort Sill, in what is now Oklahoma, and walked onto a reservation from which their descendants have never fully returned. Yellow Wolf, if the accounts are true, was killed at Walker's Creek by Robert Addison Gillespie. Or he was not. The records disagree. The Comanche remember it one way. The Rangers remembered it another. There is no stone anywhere that marks where he fell. Sam Walker did live to see his revolver in the field, though not for long. He was killed by a Mexican lancer at Huamantla, in the state of Tlaxcala, on the 9th of October, 1847, 3 years to the day. As it happened, before Wiley Harmon rode into Béxar on Manuel Ramirez's mule. He was 30. His Colt Walker revolvers, all 1,100 of them, so went on into the West and became the most valuable American handgun ever made. And the man they were named for lay in an unmarked field in central Mexico for the better part of a year before anyone came to claim his bones. Antonio Pérez lived to be 81. He never left Béxar again. His sister Elena, so far as anyone knows, died on the reservation at Fort Sill in the 1880s, a Penateka woman with Penateka children and Penateka grandchildren, and her Tejano brother's name was not, at the end, a name she used or remembered. The Ramirez family kept their small ranch on the Medina until 1878, when a different ranger company, during the height of the Nueces strip troubles, accused Manuel's grandson of cattle theft, on nothing that would have stood before an honest judge, and hanged him from a live oak a quarter-mile from the house where Wiley Harmon had eaten Isabel's soup 34 years earlier. Nobody was ever charged. 25 tools rode in a Texas Rangers kit in the year 1844. A Sotol fire drill, a pair of buckskin moccasins, a pouch of pemmican, A red cotton bandana, a tin coffee cup, a pocket whetstone, a sourdough starter in a waxed leather pouch, a pair of Mexican rowel spurs, a rawhide horse hobble, a powder horn scraped translucent, a bullet mold, a possibles bag with 30 small things inside it, a brass 3-draw spyglass, a saltillo wool syrup, a knob of yucca root soap, a stone slab for grinding mesquite beans, a gourd canteen wrapped in wet burlap, a flint and steel tinderbox, a length of woven horsehair rope laid in a circle at night against the rattlesnake, a small wooden medicine kit with things in it that would kill a modern man, a steel awl for opening the barrel cactus, a braided rawhide riata 60 feet long, a Bowie knife made by a man in Arkansas whose secret has never been fully recovered, a Sharps rifle that came later in the 70s and finished the frontier, Colt Paterson, and then a Colt Walker, and then everything after. Most of them are not in any survival manual now. Most of them were not written down while the men who carried them were still alive to write. They were carried by men who were, on the whole, not heroes, who were often frightened, who were often wrong, who buried their own and were buried in turn in draws and on riverbanks and in unmarked fields in foreign countries, without ceremony and without much notice from history. They rode in a country that did not want them, alongside people whose country they were taking, using tools that had been invented by peoples they would never fully understand, into a way of living that was already ending as they lived it. And a boy from Tennessee, who was carried down off a ridge above the Medina River by a Tejano boy whose father, a ranger, had beaten deaf, went home and became an old man and died in his own bed on a fall day in 1889. And in the last hour of his life he spoke, once, of a light on the top of a ridge. The country is very old. The tools are almost all forgotten. The men who carried them are all now under the same grass.